He took my house keys with a hug. By nightfall, a stranger's bracelet dug into my wrist while a man who used to call me Dad stood beside an administrator and called me a case. The sting wasn't the room or the bleach or the paper cup of pills. It was hearing my son explain my life like a problem to be cleared. "Just sign, it's better this way," he said. And in that moment I understood betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, files the forms, and moves you out of your own story. What he didn't know was that I'd been building a different ending quietly, with steadier hands and sharper paper than his. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Rain stitched the morning together in tight gray seams, each drop ticking on the tin roof like a metronome, keeping time with my breathing. Tacoma wears weather the way an old ship wears paint, layered, scarred, functional. I stood at the sink in my pinewood kitchen and watched steam coil from the kettle just shy of a whistle. The boards under my bare feet held a faint resin scent, a reminder that a man leaves fingerprints on a house even when he tries to keep it spotless. I've spent years trying to make straight lines out of crooked grief, sanding edges, rubbing oil into butcher block, believing that honest work keeps you upright when memory leans. My name is Daniel Pierce, though most folks around the yards still call me Dan. 72 and stubborn about it. The left knee clicks on damp mornings, but my hands do what I ask, and my mind files facts the way I file screws, by size and purpose. For 4 decades, I laid hulls and decks down in the shipyard, arguing with steel and salt and schedules. I married a woman who could carve an oar from a plank and make it sing. 10 years ago, the doctors gave our house a new sound, monitors and pumps, and then a silence that took its time settling. I learned to live with it by building small things and keeping big promises. Home for me isn't drywall. It's the one-story timber I framed myself, the workshop out back with a pegboard that looks like a diagram of my brain, and the blueberry bushes that stain my thumbs each August. The kitchen is my harbor. Butcher block I planed for a week, a kettle that whines at 98 Celsius, whether or not I ask it to, a drawer where manila sleeves sit like obedient soldiers, insurance policy here, retirement statements there, medical directives, a note to my attorney written after my wife's funeral when the world seemed likely to forget me. Over the mantel hangs my wife's oar, sanded smooth as if the river might ask for it back. I nod to it each morning, a ritual that says I remember. Routine keeps boats afloat, coffee at dawn, a walk around the property line to see what the night shifted, a few hours in the shop fitting cedar to brass, mending a neighbor's stool, or repairing a latch Mrs. Hadley brings over with an apple pie as payment I never refuse. When the Mariners play, the radio trades talk for hope. And most Sundays I expect a call from my son the way a lighthouse expects fog, regularly, if not exactly on schedule. Lately the beam's been faint. He says he's pitching deals and scaling, words that move fast and mean little if you grew up counting rivets. Evan is 30-something and high on ambition. He speaks in spreadsheets at family dinners, bless him, and watches houses the way I watch weather fronts, more for opportunity than shelter. We've always loved each other, the kind men love, with work as a shared language, but in recent years we've kept our hands on different tools. He bets on velocity. I bet on weight and balance. Once, when he described flipping a duplex like a short-term value capture, I told him a hull flipped is a hull sunk. He laughed, and I let the metaphor drift out the window. I'm not alone as much as I'm independent. My doctor calls me stubborn healthy and adds a note about hydration. My attorney, Marisol Vega, looks over my papers twice a year and says the kind of things doctors should say: direct, preventative, calm. She's the only other person who knows what sits in my safe deposit box: copies of deeds, a quietly updated will, and instructions written in my own hand in ink that doesn't bleed if the day turns wet. The long-term care policy remains folded, a parachute I hope never opens but keep packed anyway. Pride is a tool like any other. Used right, it braces. Used wrong, it splinters. I'm proud of the way I can still carry a 2x8 alone, proud of a pantry that makes sense, proud that I can read fine print without squinting. I also know that blood makes us lax. We forgive faster when the voice is familiar. If I have a blind spot, it's the soft place where my son's name lands. I kept it covered with common sense, or so I thought. On a cold Saturday toward the end of winter, Evan arrived with a pizza and a grin that showed every tooth. The box warmed my hands. His jacket let off a faint, clean smell that didn't belong to the rain or the shop. Antiseptic, clinical, the kind that turns air into a waiting room. He complimented the floor like an agent running comps and moved through the house trailing praise. I watched him admire flow, not memory. You can tell a sailor by the way he tests a rope. You can tell a son by where he puts his eyes. He ate 2 slices, talked about cash calls and runoff, and assured me business was right on the cusp. I nodded, the way you nod when barometer and bar talk disagree. If the house noticed, it didn't say. The radio dropped to a murmur. Rain tapped a steady Morse code on the roof. The oar on the wall watched us like a quiet witness. Evan chose the dining chair that allowed him to see both the kitchen and the front door, a choice so ordinary it felt planned. He laughed easily, checked his phone when it buzzed, and once paused long enough over my labeled drawer to read the tabs without opening it. I heard his breath change, not with guilt, but with inventory. I didn't accuse. Men who build for a living know the cost of pulling a board before you've measured twice. I cleared plates, stacked the box, and asked about his car's tire wear while my mind laid a chalk line across the room and checked it for Bo. When he stood to leave, he hugged me tight. "You're good, Dad," he said. "Keep warm." "Always," I said. After the door shut and the taillights washed red up the wet street, I stood at the sink and wiped a counter already clean. The kettle ticked into silence. Somewhere in the house, the furnace exhaled like a tired animal circling a bed. I looked from the oar to the rain and understood only this: doors don't betray you by slamming. They betray you by swinging easy long before any hand touches the knob. Winter was far from over. Joinery would be tested. So would judgment. I dried my hands and listened for a sound I hadn't yet learned to name. Morning arrived thinner than usual, a washed-out band of light flattening the counters and turning the steam from the kettle into ghost breath. I felt the barometer in my bones before I checked the actual dial nailed by the back door. The knee clicked sharper, each step a small gear engaging. I moved slowly, not from frailty, but from respect for weather. Any shipwright knows you meet a front at its angle, not head-on. Evan knocked with the upbeat rhythm of someone who imagines he's bringing solutions. He carried a leather folio and a reusable coffee cup the color of new tennis balls. His jacket was still damp, and the smell that rode in with him wasn't rain or road, but something clinical and cold. He set the folio on the table and produced a thick packet already tabbed with colored flags, the paper stiff with new ink smell and an embossed seal where a postal form would never need one. He spoke in the cheerful shorthand of a man who wants the signature before the questions. Just temporary mail forwarding, utilities convenience, small things so you don't have to fuss. He slid the top sheet toward me and tapped a blue flag. The tap said, "This is the part that matters." The seal said otherwise. I reached for my slimmer readers, the pair that pinches a little at the bridge, and let the silence be its own kind of inspection light. My hands flipped pages the way they always have, steady, efficient, no wasted fingerwork. Fonts argued with each other down the margin. A paragraph on agency and authority pretended it belonged beside a line about forwarding notices. I watched his fingertip drift over a clause, covering it as if he were pointing something out. The clause he hid wanted the last 4 digits of my bank account and permission to interface on my behalf with unnamed service vendors. Postal forms don't need bank digits. That seam went into my pocket where I keep small nails and doubts. His phone buzzed. He drifted onto the porch under the rain, shoulder down, speaking through the crack of the door. Words hopped the threshold in fragments. Benton, bed availability, room already arranged, harbor, intake window. When he came back in, he was all weather chatter and practical warmth, the phone face down on the table, the coffee cup lid making a small, nervous creak. I stood to refill the kettle, and the room tilted a notch, not a fall, just a deck underfoot, shifting with a cross swell. Copper touched the tongue. I reached for the counter and let my weight settle. He was beside me in an instant, concern assembled and ready. "You've been getting turned around lately," he said. I named the simpler culprits: empty stomach, not enough water, a night of bad sleep, and straightened. I've spent a life diagnosing sounds. I wasn't about to confuse symptom with cause. He lined up a strip of vitamin packets like trophies of care, adjusted the thermostat without asking, then texted someone with the briskness of a foreman signing off on a checklist. He gathered my mail as if sorting, slid a bank envelope into his folio with the casual confidence of a son doing a favor, and told me he'd scan it for me. I moved the manila drawer 2 inches shut with my hip, polite as a door closing against a draft. Out the front window, rain purled on glass and turned the street into a soft focus photograph. Across from the house, a white passenger van idled longer than any courtesy drop-off needed. The wipers moved at a tempo too lazy for the rate of rain, like a metronome someone forgot to wind fully. Hazard lights blinked twice, paused, blinked twice again. A neighbor trudging a spaniel glanced at the van at my house, then down at the sidewalk with the particular posture reserved for other people's business. When he stepped outside for a quick call, I opened the drawer and inventoried the anchors. Updated will, beneficiary instructions directing assets to the Puget Shipwrights Scholarship Fund and Mariners Mutual Aid, the lawyer's card, the sealed envelope marked "Only if I can't say this myself." I slid in a small note in block print, date, time, who called whom, fragments overheard, because paper remembers even when people choose not to. I ran the map in my head from porch to truck to bank, the way you rehearse the route to a dry dock in fog. He returned with a hug that planted the antiseptic smell squarely under my nose again, as undeniable as iodine. "I just want what's best for you while winter's rough," he said, smoothing the sentence in the middle where it snagged. He left with the folio. The van rolled away 30 seconds later as if an invisible string attached one to the other. The house resumed its ordinary conversation, the furnace cycling a patient breath, floorboards making old confessions, the radio silenced by my own hand. I checked the back and side locks and slid a wood wedge under the rear door, a habit so old I could do it in the dark. Winter is when wood swells. Wedges are how you respect that. I sat at the table and looked at the packet, the bright flags like a child's game hiding adult rules. I tried to read, then listened instead. That's a distinction I've learned to honor. Listening is reading with your body. Near midnight, the kind of quiet you only get between appliance hums settled, and then the rear lock made a sound I knew as intimately as my own name, the metallic burr of the copy I gave Evan years ago. The knob tested the door once, the bottom edge nudged the wedge and met oak that wouldn't give. Silence held for 3 slow breaths. The knob released. Air carries its own messages. A faint metallic tang threaded through the kitchen, the aftertaste of coin. I didn't move. I cupped the old maglite in my palm and became furniture. When the house's breathing returned to the usual cadence, I counted to 100 anyway. You don't rush a check seam. From the bedroom doorway, the oar's shadow stretched long across the hall, turned by a street light in the angle of my lamp. I set the packet back on the table untouched and dialed my watch alarm to a pre-dawn hour. If a man means to move another man, he chooses morning for the clean paperwork and the untroubled intersections. I lay down fully dressed, shoes by the bed, jacket folded within reach. Joinery doesn't hold because the wood never swells. It holds because the craftsman expects stress and builds allowance. I closed my eyes and measured the allowance I had left. Green-blue curtains breathed a tide against a sealed window, and the air had that tooth-cold bite of bleach trying to erase the world. I woke into angles that didn't belong to my house. A clock with a loud second hand, a bulletin laminated into politeness, a bed made with hospital corners so tight they could hold a storm. A plastic bracelet pinched my wrist, middle initial wrong, proof that a stranger had decided who I was while I wasn't looking. Disorientation lasted the length of 3 ticking seconds. Habit took over. I inventoried. Door to the right. Call button tethered like a pet to the rail. Window facing a strip of parking lot, 2 cedars, a silver line of water that might have been the bay. The light fell from the wrong side, telling me I'd lost a slice of day between my kitchen and here. The placard outside the door read, Harbor Pines Care and Rehabilitation. Room 212. The font tried to be kind. My clothes had changed into soft pants and non-slip socks, the sort of uniform that tells you you've been processed, not admitted. I ran a thumb under the edge of the bracelet and filed away the misspelling the way I file a burr off a hinge, not for vanity, for accuracy. He arrived with the scent of citrus cologne dueling the disinfectant. Crisp collar, clipboard like a prop, smile calibrated for reassurance. Mr. Pierce, I'm Lyle Benton, he said, easing into the room as if the space had always belonged to him. He stationed himself between me and the door without seeming to, the way a man might shade a chessboard with his sleeve. You're safe here. Temporary observation so we can get you comfortable. Safe is an elastic word. I let it stretch while I watched his eyes, his hands, the way he touched the chart as if it were a gavel. Before I bothered to answer, my son appeared. Relief performed so cleanly it squeaked. He carried the posture of a rescuer who'd finally wrangled a stubborn situation into compliance. He began a tidy narrative about evening confusion and a recent dizzy spell, nodding to Benton for validation at all the right commas. He laid a hand on the bed rail like a rider laying claim to a skittish horse. My history got poured into a medical cup and labeled as symptoms. I recognized the move. Names matter because they control the next move. Benton produced a packet, pre-tabbed, color-coded, its spine creased as if it had been rehearsed. Power of attorney, immediate authority. He said it lightly, the way one might say pantry inventory. We have a doctor's evaluation on file and some capacity concerns, all very standard. He tapped a section with a nail kept just a fraction too long, then did not let go of the papers. I caught a notary stamp that didn't match the date sequence, fonts that didn't agree, a seal where no seal belonged. He promised copies later today, which in my experience means not without a fight. I didn't reach for the packet. I let it rest like bait that knew its job. I'll need my phone, I said. I'd like to call my attorney, Marisol Vega. My voice sounded like deck planking, old but sound. A nurse materialized with a paper cup and a smile that had nowhere to land. Evening medications, she said. Inside the cup, a chalk-white scored tablet I didn't recognize. I turned the cup, studying light and shadow, then raised it while Benton narrated safety and comfort. The trick isn't sleight of hand, it's rhythm. I took the water, turned my head, pressed the pill to the pocket of my cheek, and let the swallow be the star of the show. When their attention drifted, I coughed lightly into a tissue and left the tablet there like a small, snow-flat confession I could produce later if anyone wondered what I'd been given. They offered a facility phone with 3 pre-programmed buttons: nurse, reception, social services. No outside line. My wallet, ring, and keys were secured for your protection. I nodded the way a man nods when a crane operator insists a load is balanced. Benton talked about safety. Evan talked about how hard this decision had been. Somewhere in the talk, my son said storage unit, framed as a favor, and I knew more of my house had been handled than the story allowed. Then he said it. Once the transfer clears, the word hung in the room with the weight of wet rope. Transfer. Not a word about care, a word about movement. Silence helps you hear weight. I didn't spill the anger. This wasn't a place for thunder. Storm seamanship applies on land. Keep your bow into it, reduce sail, trust your lines. I asked for a copy of every page they expected me to live under. Benton promised the world at later today. When night bent the corridor into a series of shallow mirrors, I began mapping. Wheels squeaked down to the supply closet and back. The admin office glowed a steady low through frosted glass. A camera dome blinked its red dot above the linen alcove where the sightline kinked. I timed the call button response. 1 minute and 50 seconds for the first press, 2 minutes flat for the second. Shift change dropped the volume of voices and propped 2 doors at once for a 30-second window that smelled like microwaved soup. Evan returned with declarations about decluttering and downsizing, code words for making room where none needed making. He stroked the story smooth. I watched the undersides where glue gathers. I corrected the misspelled initial on my bracelet for Benton's benefit. Quiet as a carpenter escorting a measurement back into the truth. It's A, not E. He smiled and said the label would be reprinted. I said I would like that. The nurse came by again with a cup and a chart. I let her think habit had planted trust while my thumb folded the edge of the tissue hiding the first pill and tucked it into the back of the facility handbook. Evidence has to live somewhere that won't accidentally be laundered. After lights out, I rolled a towel and set it against the door to cut the sliver of corridor light that invites inspection. I counted footfalls. I practiced Marisol's number in my head the way men of my generation practice multiplication tables, out of respect for the day electricity fails. In the Salvation Army Bible in the top drawer, I placed the tissue with the pill, then closed the drawer with the calm of a man setting a gauge. At dawn, the lounge windows turned into aquariums of gray water. 3 residents sat where the light found faces. A man with electrician's hands checking outlets with his eyes, a woman counting schedules without looking at the clock, and another man whose posture said he could balance a ledger in his sleep. Their eyes were awake. Mine met theirs and exchanged the kind of nod carpenters give in unfamiliar workshops. I was not a patient. I was a witness. The room had already confessed. It just didn't know where it had left the paperwork. Tomorrow morning I would sit by that window and listen before I spoke. Morning leaked into the lounge like thin paint, leaving the corners gray and the upholstery the color of old oatmeal. Heated air hummed through vents and the television muttered captions no one watched. I chose a chair by the window where the glass worked like a mirror. If I angled my body just so, I could see the staff station as a reverse stage while still looking like a man nursing coffee and patience. Shoes told me more than faces, rubber clogs, whispering, hard soles announcing, a squeak that meant a cart with a crooked wheel. I let that rhythm cover the small sounds a conversation makes when it wants to stay modest. The electrician sat 3 chairs down, a man whose forearms looked braided and whose hands, though clean, still wore the curriculum of a lifetime. The overhead light near the fish tank flickered with a stubborn pulse. He tapped the wall plate with one knuckle and mouthed almost to himself, "Loose neutral." I nodded without turning. Competence recognizes competence by scent, like salt picking out salt. I mentioned, to no one in particular, that the load in this wing felt unbalanced when the med carts plugged in. Not a question, not an invitation, just a plank floated downstream to see who might catch it. A woman slid into the seat opposite me, cardigan pockets stuffed with folded printouts until the fabric tinted. She lined up the day's activity flyer in 2 columns and smoothed it with the edge of her palm, making a spreadsheet out of thin air. Another man, lean as ledger paper and immaculate about his lenses, arrived with a crossword he never opened. In the margins, he built tiny columns of numbers, little fences to keep facts from wandering. When the captions crawled across the screen about durable medical equipment, he murmured a quip about depreciation that measured whether I could count past 10 without my fingers. I smiled with my teeth closed. He nodded once, a stamp on a small transaction. We let the room talk first. I kept my story in the passive voice as if the events had chosen me by mistake. A bracelet mislabeled, a packet labeled immediate POA. Copies promised later, no heat, only temperature. The electrician, Gus Romero as he later allowed, mentioned consent forms that looked photocopied until the commas had blurred. The woman, Alma Brooks, said doctor signatures repeated across files as if a hand had learned a trick. The man, Mr. Leonard Chin, pointed out date sequence that placed notaries before visits, visits before evaluations, and money in motion at the 10-day mark like a train schedule. We didn't conspire. We recognized a pattern and agreed on a rule older than any of us. Document, don't dramatize. Alma taught me something precise. There is such a thing as a springing power of attorney, she said, where authority unfolds only after 2 independent physicians certify incapacity. What she kept seeing read springing on the header and immediate in practice, anchored by a single evaluation, often unsigned by anyone's regular doctor. Mr. Chin stacked dates on an index card, evaluation, admission, asset movement. The cadence was too tidy to be weather and too consistent to be mercy. Tools were passed without making a ceremony of it. I offered what I had, the timing of rounds, the blind corners near linen, the steady hands to make door wedges that left no marks. Gus sketched a phone jack on a napkin and circled a service closet where a plain copper line piggybacked on newer gear. He tapped the napkin twice like a man tightening a terminal. Alma slid a folded policy sheet across the table and kept a second copy for her pocket. Mr. Chin opened a small box of index cards and wrote headings in a hand so neat it calmed the air. We built a communication plan the way you build scaffolding, fast, modular, sturdy enough for one man at a time. During recreation hour, we would use the linen alcove's blind spot. Gus could patch a handset to the live line for precisely 90 seconds before any monitor screamed. Alma would draw the nurse into a coverage clarification when the med cart reached the room with the slowest eater. My job was to speak clean, confirm capacity in my own voice, state the unlawful hold, request that Attorney Marisol Vega prepare an emergency petition and a home evaluation to anchor it. Evidence would not live only in air. I checked the battery on my watch camera and set it to short clips, never longer than the time it takes a person to clear a throat. Alma had a storage plan for small artifacts. A hymnal in the chapel whose spine had been hollowed years ago by someone else's piety or mischief. The pill I hadn't swallowed. The duplicate form someone left in the wrong folder. The half sheet with a routing number, anything small, dry, dignified would go there. Mr. Chin would keep the master index, cross-referencing file names, and who saw what first. Chain of custody works even when the chain is held by hands with liver spots. I took a slow loop of the hallway with my cane and my best imitation of nonchalance. Badges announce themselves, a swipe here, a key there, a temporary sticker that hides more than it reveals. I found the place where the administration office door opened into an angle the camera couldn't love. I counted seconds between call button chimes. I watched the 1:30 lull widen into a trough that could hold something besides sleep. I thought about escape the way a sailor thinks about lifeboats, only as a contingency, not a plan. Underneath it all, grief ran like a keel. I felt it without letting it steer. Anger can be clean fuel if you burn it right, hot and blue, without smoke to choke your own lungs. The four of us did not smile much, but when we did, it read like a pledge rather than optimism. Mission has that effect. Then Alma placed a photocopy on the table and patted the corners flat. A springing power of attorney bore my name, and in a box where an agent ought to be listed sat an entity called Pierce Harbor LLC. Evan manages it. The notary stamp belonged to an office where he once fetched coffee and paper. At the bottom, in tidy script, an independent witness signed Lyle Benton. Mr. Chin circled the conflicts in red like arteries on a diagram and whispered, "This is the spine." My chest felt both lighter and heavier at once, the way a deck does when a crate is finally lashed. We made a small covenant about safety. No photographs of anyone who hadn't agreed. No taking what did not belong to us. No sabotage. No petty vandalism. No heroics with fire alarms. The fight would be legal, documented, the kind of fight that survives cross-examination and rain. We synchronized watches like old men honoring movies made about men like us. 1:47 a.m. would be our window. Gus pocketed a flathead screwdriver that looked like a toothpick in his hand. Alma rehearsed a question about billing codes with the innocent malice of a former insider. Mr. Chin tucked fresh index cards behind his crossword. I opened my palm and felt the weight of resolve settle there as if it had always lived in that shape. Outside, rain returned to the lounge window in fine strokes, and our four reflections lined up in the glass like bulkheads meant to take a hit and not buckle. Night narrowed the corridor until it felt like a keel line, ballast lights humming a thin white path that vibrated in my teeth. The wall clock in the lounge clicked its second hand forward as if it too were sneaking. 1:42. I rehearsed the route a final time, the 4-beat from bed to door, the pivot into the linen alcove, the slide along the shadow where the fire extinguisher cabinet cast a darker rectangle. I set my cane's rubber tip down to a quiet metronome. The watch face glowed once under my palm, the tiny camera had charge and a good appetite for truth. The wing slept in pieces. A television 2 rooms down pulsed blue captions into the hallway. A med cart idled by the far station, its charger whining a high note only old men and dogs still hear. I reached the alcove and flattened myself against the hollow where cameras pretend light solves everything. The towel I'd wedged under my door earlier would tell any passerby I was tucked in. I was not. I was listening for administrative voices, the ones that move mattresses and signatures from rooms like mine to rooms with locks. The admin office door stood ajar, a sliver of aquarium light spilling across the carpet. Inside, Lyle Benton hunched over a headset, one hand on the keyboard, the other resting on a spreadsheet that painted his face in cool columns. In the glass reflection of a framed poster, I could read only edges: eval date, trigger, asset action, agent. The last column blinked the way a cursor blinks when a choice is about to be made. I let the watch lens find its angle and tapped once, a tiny haptic tick against my wrist to say we were recording. He greeted someone by first name, and familiarity took the starch out of his voice. "Evan," he said. The ceiling vent whispered above me. I shifted enough weight to quiet the knees click and counted my breaths in joinery instructions. Measure, line, cut, fit, until my pulse behaved. Benton's tone settled into the professional softness of a man who wants his verbs to sound inevitable. "Capacity confirmation is on file. Dr. P. Harlan signed off," he said. The words went into the watch like rivets. Will mark springing as active, move assets under Pierce Harbor LLC custody, then list the property as is. A keyboard clattered. Yes, the rush fee posts separately. I'll route it the usual way. Evan's side arrived in fragments, the headset's mic catching enough of his ambition to register. He asked about mail and utilities consolidation, mentioned a banker who wants proof of authority by end of week, and used transfer twice as if the very repetition would harden it into law. Will he have veto rights, had he asked? Benton's answer slid across the linoleum. No, not once the trigger is logged. That verb, logged, sat hot in my mouth. Logs are for ships and fires. Here it sounded like the excuse a machine makes for having no conscience. Process turned from suggestion to instruction. Benton referenced templates to copy over from the last capacity file, just scrub the dates, and added almost lazily that keeping the evaluation on letterhead would be enough. No need for in-person. Tele-check notes will do. He spoke of an intake window closing at 0600, after which they'd document prior episodes of evening disorientation to justify continued stay. The phrases tried to be medicine. They smelled like sawdust, wet with bleach. Copper rose at the back of my tongue, the body's old alarm. I swallowed it and pictured Mr. Chin's index cards. Who, what, when, how. I slotted each sentence under a heading. Names lived where names belonged. Verbs kept their teeth. The watch hummed once in my imagination, a comfort more than a fact, and I let the room finish telling on itself. A chair leg squeaked down the hall, metal complaining in a way only hurried feet produce. I slid deeper into the alcove shadow, pressing my spine against the gypsum as if I could become part of the wall. 7-count breath in, 7-count breath held, 7-count breath out. Benton ended with, "We'll be paper ready by noon." The headset clicked, office light dimmed, the sliver of brightness on the carpet withdrew like a tide. I stepped the route in reverse, letting each placement of the cane preface the footfall by a whisper. My door received me with its familiar resistance against the towel. Inside, the room held its geometry. Green-blue curtains, the laminated schedule, a bed too perfectly made. I closed the door until the latch decided it belonged in the frame, then sat on the mattress edge and played the recording at one notch. Names were clear. Sequence was clean. The verbs did the heavy lifting, signed off, mark active, move assets, route fee, document disorientation. The clock argued for sleep. The plan argued for action. Gus's napkin diagram said the piggyback copper line hid in the service closet now, not tomorrow at recreation hour. 2:06. The night had space for a single careful call. I palmed the handset from the alcove shelf, a relic kept for fire drills and fax machines, and made the 3-wire hops Gus had circled. The line rewarded me with a tone as honest as a ship's bell. I dialed Marisol Vega's emergency number from memory. Her voicemail picked up after one ring, sleep-thickening professionalism into kindness. I kept my payload tight. "This is Daniel Pierce, born May 12, 1953, I said. "I am competent and being held against my will at Harbor Pines Care and Rehab under Administrator Lyle Benton." I summarized what mattered. Recorded call confirms Dr. P. Harlan capacity sign-off without exam. Activation of a springing POA as immediate. Asset transfer to an entity called Pierce Harbor LLC. Mention of a rush fee and copy over templates, no in-person evaluation. Please prepare an emergency petition and seek a temporary restraining order halting any asset movement. Arrange an independent cognitive evaluation at the earliest possible time. I gave the room number and the back entrance description. I am safe. I am documenting. Call me back through the facility line, if possible, at 9 a.m. I clicked off, returned the handset to its cradle, and wiped the plastic with the edge of my sleeve. Courtesy is a habit even when you're stealing back your own life. In the room, I slid the watch under the pillow and tucked a fresh index card beneath the band with a pencil list for morning. Share audio. Assign Alma the MedPass cross-check. Ask Mr. Chin to map the dates against public records. Have Gus test the office door hinge for play. Dawn blue seeped through the curtains and turned the laminate floor into a quiet sea. I sat with my hands still and let anger settle into something I could use, flammable without smoke. They think paper moves people. Fine, I would move paper. Petitions, orders, copies, exhibits. If they wanted the shelter of forms, I would meet them there with better lumber and straighter nails. The clock rolled past 2:30, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the keel align. The boat would still take waves, but it would take them head-on under command. A craftsman learns early that there are only two honest moves when wind shifts. Tack now and accept a shorter, choppier path, or hold your course long enough to catch a better angle. Staring at the green-blue curtains and the laminated schedule that had already tried to name my life for me, I laid both maps on the table in my head. Call the police at dawn and risk Benton bleaching the evidence, or let him and my son walk 2 steps farther onto the plank so the sound of their boots would carry in court. Anger argued for speed. Paper argued for patience. Patience won because I had built for it. In a safe deposit box downtown, I kept a small arsenal assembled when grief stopped being fog and started being instruction. The updated will lived there, not a glossy thing, just words set straight. The transfer on death instructions lived there too, pointing house and land toward the Puget Shipwright Scholarship Fund and Mariners Mutual Aid the moment my heart stopped without asking my son's permission. And a video declaration sat on a thumb drive labeled in my hand, recorded 3 months earlier on a clear afternoon, explaining why a man could love his child and still draw a line until that child learned the math of consequence. Those instruments didn't end the danger, but they fenced it. Fences buy time. Through the night's voicemail, I had already asked Marisol for the legal ramp, an emergency petition to void whatever power of attorney they'd misused, a temporary restraining order to freeze the flow of assets like ice on a river, and an independent cognitive evaluation so no one could hang a lie on my clarity. The morning would need a confirmation call, a clock, and a witness. I had 3. I set the watch face to vibrate at 9 and wrote a list on the back of an index card in a hand that would look sober to a judge. Who, what, when, how. At first light, I gathered my porch allies in the lounge's thin warmth. The 147 recording played from my watch face at the lowest notch. Benton's professionalism dropping names like receipts. Dr. P. Harlan, springing marked active. Pierce Harbor, LLC, rush fee. Document disorientation. We didn't cheer, we assigned. Alma would comb the MedPass, policy sheets, and any mention of telecheck to prove the shortcut they bragged about. Mr. Chin would marry dates to public feeds, evaluation, admission, asset movement, with the calm malice only arithmetic can afford. Gus would test hinge play on the admin door with a janitor's smile and verify the piggyback copper line for a second call if needed. We agreed on a language, short, plain, exact. It would be cleaner to stage the turn under cover of medicine. I asked the unit nurse for a cardiology check, citing the previous night's wobble and my age in the same sentence. Healthcare loves its pretexts. She penciled an appointment that would route me near the plaza downtown by late Friday morning. If Harbor Pines wanted to package my life in forms, I would ride their paperwork to the vault where my own papers waited. The plan, the facility van would deliver me to the facade stamped with respectable glass, and I would walk not to a waiting room but to a familiar desk where a teller who had watched me count savings since my wife died would slide a clipboard across and say my name correctly. We choreographed the vault with the thoroughness shipwrights give to ballast, retrieved the TOD documents, the updated will, the video declaration, and the handwritten ledger where I had noted deposits and bills in the clean lines of a man who still believes numbers should answer when spoken to. Photocopy and scan on-site so we would never again chase a single piece of paper across town. Place certified copies in Marisol's expanding file and carry a stamp set in my jacket pocket like a spare compass. Put fresh signatures on fresh notary lines under a date no one could misread. If a judge wanted contemporaneous proof that I owned my decisions, I'd hand it across in triplicate. Marisol called back mid-morning while I stood by the lounge window pretending to follow a slope of rain. Calm as a level, she reported that she had pulled a credit file before coffee and found a new door in the hall, an SBA microloan application completed 3 months ago using my social security number for Pierce Harbor LLC, the outfit my son managed. It changes venue, she said. It changes leverage. I let the words settle without splashing. A father's heart boils fastest when a child stains his own hands, but boiling bends metal. File it where it belongs, I told her. Let it do the weight it can do. The choice hardened. We would let them post the signs they had already painted in their heads. Mail consolidation, utilities, maybe even a draft listing passed from one inbox to another. The paper trail would mature like a bad debt. Then the petition would land, the restraining order would bite, and the independent evaluation would draw a straight pencil line through their fog. No hallway theatrics, no righteous shouting to satisfy pride. Obstinacy belongs to storms. Strategy belongs to shipwrights. I rehearsed contingencies the way I rehearse a cut. Measure twice, then once more. If the van driver tried to keep me on a tight leash, I would assert my right to call counsel in his presence without drama. If Benton dialed during the trip, I would answer politely and say nothing of substance, the way one speaks to weather reports when one is already under sail. I set my pockets, ID here, attorney's card there, the stamped copies flat against my chest. A spare pencil went in the watch pocket, tip up, respect the point. The envelope labeled, "Only if I can't speak today," waited on my nightstand, sealed in my tidy print. Inside were the facts that would not change if I couldn't say them. Intent, beneficiaries, counsel of record, a contact at the scholarship fund, the bank branch, the date of the video. I hope never to need the envelope. Hope is not a plan, so I wrote it anyway. By evening, the nurse confirmed the cardio ride for Friday at 10. I thanked her like a man borrowing a tool and tightened my watch strap until the leather pressed the pulse in a steady reminder. The oar's reflection lay long across the pine floor when I passed my room, pointing past harbor pines, past a van idling at a curb, past glass doors and a steel box and a bench where a judge would eventually balance verbs against facts. I breathed the way men breathe when they are about to make a decisive cut. Slow in, steady out, blade square to grain. Tomorrow we would move paper. Then paper finally would move them. Friday arrived with the noisy choreography of a place pretending to be gentle. Breakfast trays slid, plastic lids kissed and popped. The med cart clicked its brakes like a metronome, trying to hold a rhythm over conversation. I shaved with the little disposable they issued, combed the gray flat, and dressed with the same attention I would give a valve install. ID card, front pocket, attorney's card behind it, sealed envelope inside jacket, watch charged and set to vibrate. I practiced stillness until my hands steadied on their own. A nurse stuck her head in and told me the van would be at the door at 10, cardiology on the schedule. Just a quick check. I thanked her like a man accepting a tool he asked for yesterday. In the lobby, the morning had a bureaucrat's smile. The driver was mid-30s, a shoulder-wide orderly with tired eyes that refused to give away a thought. His name tag said Marcus. He checked a clipboard box and gestured to the van with choreography that wanted to be courteous and couldn't quite stop being procedure. I noted the auto locks clicking once we were in, the belts that cinched and then tightened another half notch, the authorized outing form clipped where a passenger could read it without quite reading it. Two other residents climbed aboard, one for physical therapy, the other for a skin check. Their presence lent ordinary cover to the day. I sat behind Marcus and rehearsed the lines I might need if something went sideways, neutral if questioned, exact if challenged, concise if free. The van pulled from the curb and the town arranged itself into the old map inside my chest. Cedar dark and dripping, a gray ribbon of bay teasing the edges of parking lots. The auto parts store still selling things I already owned. A little league field gone winter brown where I had taught my son to square his stance. Nostalgia is a thief when you have a job to do. I watched it pass and then looked at the lane markers like they were the only true stories. At the third light, I saw a second car behind us with the same facility decal, not near enough to be rude, not far enough to be random. The driver kept 2 lengths back and pretended to glance at their phone at every red. I filed it under extra eyes and let my pulse settle. If Benton had grown suspicious after the night's call, he would try to tighten his net. Nets catch fish that lunge. I had no intention of lunging. The medical plaza appeared with its patient landscaping and hopeful glass. Marcus escorted the 2 other riders inside a rehab office with the practiced ease of a man who has learned how to be present without being visible. My stop sat on the clipboard as Dr. Allen Cardiology. I descended last, cane steady, envelope firm against ribs. The tail car idled at the far end of the lot, tint doing what tint does. Rain stippled my jacket in neat temporary dots. At the corner of the building, the sidewalk bent out of sight, and there, where the plaza gave way to the street, a familiar sedan idled. Marisol met my eyes across glass. That was all the ceremony we could afford. I climbed in as if I had always meant to. Marcus stepped back into the daylight, too late to see anything but a man opening a different door. He took 2 steps toward us and then hesitated, a calculation he didn't want to own happening behind his careful face. He turned back to his clipboard and the building entrance, the way a man turns from weather he can't name. The bank sat 4 blocks east and older than everything around it, a rectangle of brick that remembered handshakes. The teller recognized me, said my name the way people say your name when it belongs to the same town as theirs. She asked after my late wife with the kind of gentleness that makes grief feel like a bench and not a fall. We signed the ledger and passed into the vault's hush, that cool, bright silence where metal chooses not to brag. In the small room, the box slid onto the table with the same weight I remembered. I opened it and put my hands where I had promised myself they would go. The updated will, the transfer on death instructions, the thumb drive with my video declaration, the ledger where I had made entries with a steady pen, dates neat, figures clear. Marisol spread each item on the felt like a mechanic laying out sockets by size. The bank notary stamped copies with the day's date in ink that bled slightly into the paper fibers, the way truth does when it settles. We scanned, we certified, we duplicated. I signed fresh declarations in front of 2 witnesses, their names and positions blocking any allegation that someone had coached my hand. For the first time in days, the geometry of my life matched the geometry of the room. Marisol gathered certified sets into a folder, hands moving with tempered urgency. "I'll file ex parte within the hour," she said. "Emergency petition and a request for a temporary restraining order. Independent evaluation to follow, likely by Monday." I nodded and did not spill relief into the space we needed for detail. She handed me my stamped copies, ballast to carry against the storm. I slipped them under my jacket where the heat of my chest would remind them they were mine. We drove back toward the plaza by a route a block longer than necessary. The tail car had not been patient. It appeared across an intersection and fell in behind us again with new appetite. At the next light, the driver lifted a phone and took a photo, one-handed and shameless. The click of a stranger's lens often feels like theft even when it is legal. I watched the green come and go and refused to be hurried. I chose to return with Marcus. Escalation would only heat the air Benton was already fanning. I stepped out of Marisol's sedan with the casual fatigue of a man whose appointment simply ran late. She drove on without looking back. I walked to the van and tapped the door twice. Marcus opened it and said nothing. The safest of his options. We rode in a silence that sounded like tires on wet road, which is to say, honest. At one light, the tail car pulled alongside just long enough for the driver to angle a phone again. The flash didn't fire. It didn't need to. Benton wanted record where he thought he owned the script. Back at Harbor Pines, the lobby smile had lost its softness. Staff moved with the alert quiet of people who have been told to notice. I signed back in on a line that did not ask me whether I had stepped out of my lane. My jacket pocket pressed warm against the papers I had carried home like a man carrying his own name. Today had tipped my hand, but it had also set a clock in motion that no one could unring. Paper moves people if you stack it right. I rested my head against the van window for a breath before I stood, watched rain bead and trail, and repeated the sentence until it felt like a hull under me. Paper moves people. Afternoon light thinned to a skim, the kind that lies politely over surfaces without warming anything underneath. Doors side shut a fraction faster, smiles shortened by half a tooth. I felt the window narrowing and put my breath into the same slow track I use before a decisive cut. Jacket pocket, press check, stamped copies warm against the ribs, watch at 78%. Index cards squared to the edge of the table like planks ready for a join. We convened in the lounge's corner by the window that turned the staff station into a mirrored stage. No grievance, just mission. I laid out the morning in clean phrases. Safe deposit box opened, updated will and transfer on death instructions retrieved, video declaration duplicated, fresh declaration signed before witnesses and stamped the color of wet brick. 3 nods landed with the quiet weight of tools set down, not applause. To keep us disciplined, I drew the grid Mr. Chin had suggested. 4 branches, 4 lanes to run evidence down without wandering. Branch A, misuse of a springing power of attorney labeled immediate, 1 evaluation only, notary stamps and dates that disagree with each other. Branch B, unlawful confinement and transfer, intake notes that read like script, no outside dialing from the facility phone, the convenient fiction of temporary observation. Branch C, asset funneling Pierce Harbor LLC at the end of too many arrows, talk of an as-is list, utilities and mail consolidation, a rush fee that wanted to hide in a separate ledger. Branch D, identity theft, a federal spine, an SBA microloan application filed with my number and my name. Mr. Chin began the master ledger sheet, each branch a column, each exhibit an index in his tidy hand. Assignments rolled like a drill. Alma would pull policy and highlight where telecheck pretended to be medicine. She would match MedPass timing against what Benton bragged about on the call. Gus would verify the piggyback copper line still sang true and see how much play lived in the admin office hinge. He would mark which camera domes blinked and which held a steady red eye. Mr. Chin would crosswalk our dates against county recorder feeds and listing caches, collecting screenshots with timestamps that sink their own nails. I would curate physical exhibits into a single envelope for Marisol, the pill I had not swallowed, a duplicate form bearing the wrong sequence, the photocopy of the springing POA with the wrong witness lined up beside the wrong notary. Parallel tracks matter when time runs short. We drafted a concise incident summary, names and dates like studs in a frame, verbs that carry intent. The call queue sat ready on an index card. Adult Protective Services to open the case, State Attorney General's consumer line to light the bigger beacon, local police non-emergency to log the hold, and the SBA Inspector General for the theft of the number that marks a life in this country. We practiced keeping each report under 5 minutes, a discipline of facts rather than feelings. Marisol called on speaker from a hallway that sounded marble. She spoke in paragraphs that had already been filed. The emergency petition and the request for a temporary restraining order had clerk stamps. A judge would review as early as tomorrow morning. An independent evaluation sat tentatively booked for Monday at 9 at my house if I was released, or at the facility if not. Her advice was simple structural engineering: avoid confrontation, protect access, route every inquiry through counsel. I said I understood. That speech requires no rehearsal when you have been building for it. For a cash, Alma led us not to a closet, but to dignity. The chapel door gave into a low-traffic hush that smelled of polish and old pages. On the third shelf, a hymnal looked a hair too heavy. Inside, the spine had been hollowed neatly years ago by someone who believed in practical mysteries. We staged a micro set only, the pill in its tissue, one duplicate form, a micro SD copy of the watch audio. Originals stayed with me or with Marisol. Mr. Chin logged who placed what, where, and when, chain of custody beginning with card number 1 and counting up, his pencil point never wandering. Fieldwork followed, measured as a joiner's walk. I noted a board that promised care plan meetings for rooms whose occupants had never been called to talk. I compared the visitor log against faces I knew had crossed the threshold and found omissions that will matter later. I watched the medcart's timestamps and matched them to Alma's printouts. Gus loosened a door plate and tightened it again, a maintenance gesture hiding an observation. The admin office hinge had given enough to admit a careful hand without a slam. We were not burglars. It was good to know we would not have to be. By the vending nook where the carpet gives up and linoleum begins, a nurse intercepted me with the posture of someone delivering bad news to herself. She introduced herself as Talia, voice low and steady over nerves that could have rattled a tray. She showed me a phone held in both hands like an offering. Screenshots stacked. Messages from Evan asking for compliance, suggesting the sedatives be kept light but present, pointing out that 2 incidents on file would justify the narrative. She said they had dated briefly, that she had believed his concern was real until concern turned into instruction. Now Benton's tone had shifted toward blame, and she wanted the truth to live somewhere that could protect it. I gave her Marisol's secure email and asked for the originals to remain untouched. Mr. Chin recorded the contact with initials only. Alma suggested she send herself a contemporaneous memo, subject line with date and time, to fix the moment in a system that keeps its own clock. Talia nodded, relief showing at the edges the way dry land shows between swells. The facility noticed us noticing. A wellness check sign appeared on my door. Staff eyes trailed a fraction longer. Benton walked the hall twice in an hour and let his smile show its wire. We adapted. No clustering at corners. Handoffs timed to meal noise and television chatter. If addressed, we stuck to weather and sports, the universal solvents of suspicion. A text arrived from Marisol. The judge might hear the restraining order as early as tomorrow morning, be reachable by 8:30. I laid out a courtroom packet that would fit in a single jacket pocket. Stamped copies, index card overview, bullet points of the recorded call, a short witness list using initials where needed. I practiced the answer that would hold if anyone tried to draw me into a hallway debate. No comment, counsel will respond, thank you. The sting of Talia's revelation had a different shape than the others. Evan's reach had pressed against the ethics of strangers and found too many soft spots. I let the disappointment move through like water under a hull, noted, measured, not allowed to breach. Harm prevented outranks pride satisfied. It's a ranking that keeps boats from sinking and men from exploding. Night gathered early. I set the next day's clothes on the chair, slid papers into the jacket, and put the watch on charge where I could see the red blink like a heartbeat that meant readiness. In the chapel, Alma returned the hymnal to its shelf and aligned the row by sight. The book looked like any other book, ordinary and complete, and that is what we wanted. We had placed the first proofs into a hive that had believed itself honey. By morning, if the clock cooperated, a judge would tap a gavel no one could ignore. I practiced a first sentence under oath, simple and true, then let the quiet close around it like a seal. Rain rinsed Tacoma clean before daybreak, leaving the courthouse steps the color of wet slate and the air sharp enough to keep a man awake without coffee. I dressed in the same deliberate order I would use to rig a hoist: stamped copies and index card overview in the inside pocket, attorney's card where I could reach it without searching, watch charged, shoes tied with knots I trusted. A taxi carried me past a block of glass towers pretending to be older than they were, and then I stood in the security queue with roofers, nurses, and one kid in a thrift store suit balancing a stack of folders like plates. The tray swallowed my keys and the guard returned them with the small, universal nod that says we are all temporarily equal under the magnetometer. Marisol met me outside courtroom 7, brisk gait, calm voice, a pin behind her ear the way some people wear flowers. She flipped through my packet with the speed and care of a mechanic counting valves, touching each anchor, certified transfer on death and will copies the USB with my video declaration, the micro SD duplicate of the 147 recording, the chain of custody index in Mr. Chin's neat hand. She reminded me to speak only to the judge, keep sentences concrete, who, what, when, how, and let her argue the law. I breathed the way I do before a decisive cut and felt the ribs of the building take the breath in return. The bailiff called our case, the room rose, and the judge took the bench with a face that made adjectives unnecessary. Appearances went on the record: Marisol for me, a gray-suited lawyer for Harbor Pines, a separate counsel for Lyle Benton, and at the end of the row, Evan with a private attorney who wore urgency like cologne. The judge marked the scope. Emergency petition and temporary restraining order, not a trial. We would address urgent relief and credibility. It was the kind of framing that keeps tempers from straying into theater. Marisol built a clean frame in 3 paragraphs. She summarized the signs of unlawful confinement: a facility phone with no outside line, intake notes retrofitted to a story, a bracelet mislabeled as if someone else knew me better than I did. She explained that a springing power of attorney requires 2 independent physicians, but had been treated as immediate on the strength of a telecheck from a doctor who never laid eyes on me. She laid out the asset funnel plan through Pierce Harbor LLC, the talk of an as-is listing, the rush fee tucked into a separate route, and the federal twist of an SBA microloan application made with my number. Exhibits were labeled like a shop wall: A for POA, B for access limits, C for the audio and transcript, D for bank certified will and TOD, E for the SBA report. Relief requested fit on a single plank. Freeze the assets, release me home, order an independent evaluation, preserve the records. I raised a palm for the oath and let the words settle on my tongue before sending them across. I told the judge about the bracelet, about the facility phone with 3 buttons and none to reach my attorney, about the chalk-white pill I didn't swallow, and the tissue where it slept until it became evidence. I described standing in the hallway at 147, how the admin office door stood ajar, and how Benton's voice carried down the seam. Springing marked active. Move assets under Pierce Harbor LLC, list as is, rush fee, document prior evening disorientation. I explained the bank visit, retrieval of will and TOD, signing a witness declaration, the stamp of the day on paper that now lived in my jacket. I kept verbs honest and dates precise and left motives to other rooms. The facility's lawyer pressed on safety. He referenced notes about evening confusion and said the staff had acted in compassion within protocol. He questioned the recording's admissibility. Marisol cited the one-party consent statute and reminded the court this was urgent relief, not final resolution. The judge allowed the audio for a limited purpose, her voice taking care to note the standard. Benton's counsel spoke of templates and best practices. The judge asked why a tele-evaluation ever substitutes for an exam when liberty rides on the signature, and why a notary stamp seems to anticipate a date that has not yet existed. A courtroom learns who is listening by the questions that grow teeth. The smoking gun did its work without swagger. Marisol played a curated clip to spare the court the hallway hum. Benton's voice, named Dr. P. Harlan, said springing would be marked active, said assets would be moved, said a rush fee would find the usual path, said paper ready by noon. Marisol walked the chain of custody carefully: watch capture, micro SD duplication, index log, seal. Mr. Chin nodded from the gallery like a ledger approving a sum. Across the aisle, Evan's posture changed the way a sail changes when the wind cuts 30 degrees. No movement, and yet everything different. Two corroborating witnesses stepped lightly through narrow doors. Alma testified about policy deviations and MedPass timing, using a vocabulary the judge didn't have to translate. Mr. Chin introduced a one-page date map that showed evaluation, admission, and asset movement moving like a metronome toward a listing. He noted the SBA identity theft alert already lodged with the Inspector General. Talia's affidavit waited in the stack with screenshots ready to be unsealed if the court wanted names. The judge read enough to understand what shape the swarm had taken. Findings came in the measured cadence of carpentry: piece presented, assessed, set. The judge said preliminary evidence suggested I was competent, that a springing instrument had been misused, that an attempted asset transfer created a risk of harm that could not be unwrung. Orders followed. A temporary restraining order halted any movement of money, mail, or utilities and barred any listing activity tied to my name or home. Harbor Pines was ordered to release me to my residence without interference and to preserve all records, communications, and surveillance related to my admission and stay. The independent evaluation was authorized for Monday morning at 9. Notice would go to the SBA and a referral to the State Attorney General would accompany the file for potential criminal review. The pen strokes were thin and black and final. The bailiff served orders on counsel. Certified copies found my hand and slid into the pocket where they belonged. A status hearing took a date 2 weeks out. The judge warned everyone about spoliation as if she were telling weather to behave. Marisol's palm found my shoulder with the weight of a promise kept on time. I thanked Alma and Mr. Chin with a nod that stood in for more. The rest of gratitude would be served at a table with real plates. Outside, post-rain brightness made the city look briefly new. I did not celebrate. I did what I have always done when a bulkhead holds. I breathed, measured the next cut, and moved toward the truck that would take me home. In the rear view, Harbor Pines shrank into the kind of small a man can step over. In my jacket, the stamped orders warmed like ballast, and the ore on my wall waited for its morning light. Morning took the lid off the sky and left Tacoma rinsed and high, the kind of blue that makes pine floors glow as if lit from underneath. I stood in my kitchen and let the kettle hum up through its throat until steam wrote soft lines on the window. The ore above the mantel caught a stripe of sun and sent it down the wall like a ruler. I brushed a hand across the butcher block, checked the shop door twice, then set the stamped orders, the TRO, and the certified copies in a shallow tray I built years ago for sandpaper. Order, reclaimed and visible. Paper, exactly where it should live. Monday's independent evaluation came first thing as promised. 9 a.m., a clinician who smelled faintly of coffee and wore neutrality like a uniform. He asked for months backward, drew intersecting pentagons in the air for me to copy, and listened to how I keep a ledger. He wrote notes that never wandered into opinion and left with a handshake that said, "The facts were enough." By afternoon, Marisol's message chimed. Capacity confirmed without hedging adjectives. Harbor Pines acknowledged the preservation order. Benton placed on administrative leave pending inquiry. The state attorney general and the SBA inspector general had opened files. I took the screwdriver and rekeyed the locks, called the post office to lift the mail hold, verified the utilities in my name, put alerts on my accounts, and set a credit freeze so clean it clicked. Practical aftercare, the way you polish a tool before you hang it back on the peg. By Thursday, I wanted the house to smell like welcome. Pot roast went into the oven because rituals matter, and the last time I set that scent moving through these rooms, it had been wasted on a conversation pretending to be care. This time it would serve its rightful purpose. I set the table in the old way, linen runner, mismatched plates that had outlasted 1,000 dinners, 2 candles that didn't need to be lit to do their job. The cane leaned by the door in reach and out of the way. The oar presided, quiet as always. Gus arrived first with a bottle wearing a humble label, the glass still cool from the trunk. Alma followed, apple pie wrapped in a clean towel patterned with cherries as if someone had drawn summer by hand. Mr. Chin brought a folder sealed with a paperclip and a smile that meant the columns added up. We took our seats without ceremony. I carved and passed and poured, and the room filled with ordinary sounds that announced a home is still a home, knife against plate rim, a chair scuffing wood, laughter kept low, to respect the bones of the place. We traded news with the same economy we use when we pass tools. Merchin reported that a preliminary schedule for facility oversight had posted. Several families had reached out, and a legal aid group was sketching the first lines of a class action. Alma said the state's Elder Protection Office had interviewed her. Her notes were scanned and logged. She was already helping 2 residents track down relatives who could get them where love lives. Gus said Harbor Pines had swapped hardware, tightened server logging, and started audit trails even a lazy auditor could follow. He set down his fork and called it what it was. Screws don't fix ethics, but they record them. I agreed without spending words. Marisol called in for a minute on speaker, voice steady and close. Investigations had formal names now. Benton and Evan were subjects, not stories. No contact allowed. Possible charges included elder financial abuse and identity fraud. The district attorney's office had floated restorative terms if guilt entered the room. Restitution, a hard course of financial education, community service with a shipyard nonprofit that teaches teenagers how to read grain and tide. I said forgiveness was a road, not a ruling, and any crossing would require truth with receipts. The room understood and let the subject move along without pretending it was light. A note had come earlier in the day, hand-delivered to my mailbox and tucked under an elastic around the current water bill. Talia wrote that screenshots and metadata sat with counsel now and that she would stay anonymous until a subpoena asked her to step into light. I lifted my glass and spoke a single line, to those who choose right when it costs them. We drank without clinking, the quieter kind of gratitude that doesn't need to show itself to count. Dessert turned the table into a classroom in the best sense. I laid out what these weeks taught me in the same tone I use when I show a neighbor how to set a hinge. Keep wills and transfer on death documents current and off-site. Record a short video declaration in your own words and put it where another adult can reach it. Understand that springing powers of attorney should require 2 independent evaluations. Never sign immediate authority without counsel. Maintain a ledger in your own hand so no one can credibly argue you drifted away from your life. Know your neighbors and name an attorney you trust. Set credit alerts. These aren't paranoia. They are the way love wears boots. Laughter did its work where lists cannot. Gus told a story about a porch light wired backward by a cousin who swore he knew better. Alma described billing codes that rewarded patience over precision and how she had learned to speak both languages when it mattered. Mr. Chin corrected Gus's math with the gentleness of a man turning a board to reveal a clearer grain. I watched the absence at the table, the felt space where my wife belongs, the echo of a son who had chosen a harder road. And I understood that you can fill a room without pretending to replace what's missing. I had been a case. Now I was a host again. When the night thinned to that soft hour between warmth and cleanup, they rose. I stood in the entry and took coats from shoulders, a ceremony I learned from a woman who understood houses better than any architect. The door closed behind each friend with the gentle latch of a job done right. In the kitchen, I stacked plates, ran hot water until steam climbed, and wiped the butcher block with a clean cloth. Control, expressed through care instead of fear. I looked up at the ore and said 4 words to the woman who carved it. "We're steady now." The sentence landed without drama and stayed. Before sleep, I set the cane on 2 pegs I'd installed beside the door, a tool at rest, not a prop for battle. I drafted a short letter to the scholarship fund and the Shipwrights Mutual Aid, confirming my intentions and inviting them to visit the shop when the season turns. Outside, rain started again, softer than threat, as if the weather remembered the difference between pressure and harm. I stepped onto the porch and let the air take its measure of me, then of the house. Real family, I have learned, is the crew that shows when the weather turns. And good joinery, legal and human, holds not because stress never comes, but because it is built expecting stress and honoring it with structure. When I closed the door, the ore caught a last line of light and the tray of papers sit level, and the kettle, cooling on the stove, ticked like a clock that knew its work. In the end, justice wasn't a thunderclap, it was paperwork stacked straight and a door opening under the steady pressure of truth. What was taken by manipulation was reclaimed by patience and proof. The lesson is simple. Love without boundaries becomes surrender. And preparation is not paranoia, but care for the future you intend to live. Real protection is built before the storm, with documents that speak when you are tired and with neighbors who show up when it counts. Dignity endures not by crushing others, but by insisting on boundaries, facts, and lawful remedies. When storms come, as they always do, good joinery holds. The plans you made, the people you trusted, and the voice that refuses to sign away its name. If this story stirred something in you, share what stayed with you in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice keeps this community strong. If you found value here, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for spending this time with us.